for the AM4INFRA project presentation is part of our remit. I sense that there could be one or two others joining soon. So first and foremost, as part of the protocol, I'm hoping everyone can see what we are presenting. If there are any issues, could you just let us know here in High-Vis England office UK. Are we all okay? Can we see the screens?
Yes, I can.
Me too.
Okay. So the other thing is, I'm not sure how many will join, but we had a few in terms of numbers who actually were willing to engage with this webinar seminar. So there are two ways. So we will present the slides, as you can see. There are sort of presenters here with me. I've got Nang and Ba.
Hello.
And you're Warren Bradley. Good morning.
Okay, so three of us here presenting, and hopefully you will enjoy the presentation, but more importantly, you know, you get some value out of the presentation for those who are not involved in the project as such. You can ask questions following our presentations, either by phone or by the chat line. So you will have, you can ask your questions on chat line, and we'll try and answer them through the discussions as such. Are we all okay on that? Yeah?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
To avoid any echoing when you're asking, if those who are not asking questions could mute the phone as such, so we get, you know, clear sort of voice across here for any specific questions. So if we're all ready and you had your coffees and so forth by your side, shall we start? Yeah? Okay, is Fabio there? Yeah.
Maybe ask
Fabio?
Yep, here I am. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Ramesh.
Okay, so Fabio,
I will take.
Yes, sorry. So Fabio, you're one of the presenters today as well, and we'll just run through it. So we're going to cover the basics of the asset management infra project, why, and what our program is, and then we'll run through the sort of the specifics that relate to the remit for High-Vis England as such. So that would be more about our sort of what do you call the project as such, and which covers whole life cost and risk based. I should say, you know, I didn't introduce myself, so my name is Ramesh Sinhal. I'm project leader for Work Package 2, which is all about whole life cost and risk based models for road asset management as such. So moving on to the agenda, we're going to talk about that particular sort of aspect. As I've said, that's our remit. And then we will be talking about the living laboratory, which we had in relation to the specific geographical area and the outcomes. So between ourselves and, you know, Warren as well, we'll be presenting the sort of the purpose and the outcome as such. So the agenda, hopefully you can see, or you've got sight of it, and thereafter we can discuss, you know, High-Vis England being the moderator, so I can manage that hopefully. And then Fabio, you will summarize and give your direction on next steps and closing remarks. So hopefully we can manage in terms of timing and communication as such. So if we can start, so really as a start, we're going to talk about the aim of this webinar and the introduction as such, which I've covered. So move on to the next slide. So Fabio, you're the presenter in
Yep.
terms of the broad overview of the project which we're doing for the European Commission. Okay.
Thank you, Ramesh. Good morning, everybody. My name is Fabio Pasquali. I work for ANAS, which is the National Road Agency, and as well as one of the shareholders of AM4INFRA. AM4INFRA is a coordination support action framed in the European Union financed program Horizon 2020. Its main goal is to meet the challenges of the management of the infrastructures related to public needs and interests. It intends to provide solutions to the stakeholders' expectations, the maximizing of the efficiency of public finance, the reaction to climate change, and the improvement of the resilience of the assets owned by the community. But more in detail, the major goals of the project are the following two. First, a further enhancement of current asset management practices in order to enable effective and efficient decision-making across the assets within the individual modes. And two, a strengthening of the asset management approach across modes and borders in order to get to a further level of governance. Let us get to the players. AM4INFRA involves 5 major road network players representing Ireland, Italy, Slovenia, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. It also involves representatives from the scientific community, such as the Wuppertal Institute of Germany, the Center for Research and Technology of Greece, and FERL, Forum of European National Highway Research Laboratories, provides the expertise for communication and dissemination of the know-how developed by the project. My final note refers to the organization of the project and its structure based on work packages. Work package 1, assigned to Rijkswaterstaat of Netherlands, develops a common language to push forward in cross-modal and cross-border optimization of transport networks. This includes identification of common definitions, principles, and methodologies for decision-making and prioritization of infrastructure investments. Work package 2, assigned to Highways of England, deals with the life cycle management, risk-based approach, and asset performance. And I will not get into more detail because it's the day of Highways of England, so I don't want to take time. Work package 3, assigned to ourselves, to ANAS, provides the groundings for classifying the asset's key information, create an asset data dictionary, and design a common core system model for asset information management. Work package 4 is the responsibility of FERL, and it's related to replication, dissemination, and communication. The project has developed traditional tools, such as reports published on the AM4INFRA website, and some more innovative ones, such as the living laboratories, as will be explained in the today's webinar. So I thank you for the attention, and I will back at the end of the webinar, as Ramesh said, and I give the floor again to Ramesh Signal of Highways of England. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fabio. Much appreciated. So I think the message from Fabio's presentation is all about, and the emphasis will be common language, common data, and data management, and common approach. That's the theme of the overall program as such. So I'll move on to the next element of this sort of presentation, which is our remit as Highways England. As part of that, our remit was to address whole life cost and risk-based models for road asset management. This is quite integral in many, many ways. So, you know, we had specific sort of tasks, but when we talk about investment, you know, the underlying theme is that we need to understand why are we investing, or, you know, maintaining our network, where should we maintain, and what's the best approach in terms of the processes. So whole life cost is all about the principles of being right treatment at the right place at the right time. Risk-based models, for many assets, there are risks attached to the way we manage our assets. So do we have robust risk-based approaches for managing the road assets as such? I should address that, as it is sort of cross-modal, that the principles of these whole life cost and risk-based are equally applicable to any other major assets, whether it be roads or water or railways as such. So these are being the primary examples. So that's the sort of the underlying theme. And our task, the task number 2, work package 2, D.2, I should say. So we were required as part of the first sort of protocol was to review current practices for assessing network investments. How do we invest? Why do we invest? And is this robust enough? The next aspect was to include how do we incorporate major and minor improvements as part of that program, but how do we interrelate with the maintenance and operational needs as such? Okay, so hi. So we're getting a little bit of echo at this end, so maybe one or two may need to mute at the other end. So that's the sort of the main aspect. So going back to maintenance, we're talking of renewal works in terms of major maintenance works, but also the operational element, which is day-to-day activity in ensuring we understand the network behavior, we understand what its immediate needs are, and also building on that in terms of the overlying risks in the longer term and such. So that's the principles of what we were asked to do. So the tasks also include the review of the application, goes without saying, whole life cost and risk-based tools for assessing cross-asset, which I've just mentioned, whether it be water, railway, whatever. So, and the review principally, at the start of the project, resulted in sort of, the development of the fundamental 6 building blocks. Okay. So what are these, the building blocks? I think I've just said in terms of the earlier point, what are the drivers for renewal across Europe, I should say? Do the authorities adopt whole life cost calculation as the sort of key tool? Do they adopt deterministic and risk-based probabilistic tools? And linking on to what Fabio had said, are there appropriate governances and processes to ensure that we manage the sort of the overall assets suitably? More importantly, it won't work if you don't have detailed knowledge of the assets as such. So in terms of knowledge, to have adequate data, because data is a huge, huge support. Ironically, data in itself is an asset. So think in those terms. And do we maintain those data historically over a period, or do we collect and forget? So those sort of things we need to build. But the underlying thing was making sure the long-term ambition of there is better use of existing old and new data as such. We have a big network, so we also sort of identified the route-based renewal maintenance as a key element. So here we are talking about the trans-European network because that's the sort of the base model on which this project really works on. So the trans-European network, do we have a strategic view according to the building blocks, cross borders as such, and are we managing in an optimum way? One thing I must emphasize, whatever we're doing is about focusing and meeting the road users' needs in case of roads, but in a broader sense, meeting users of the assets as such their needs as well. So this applies, as I've said, for any form of assets and cross-border as such. And as I've said, it is all about common language, common approach, and actually having the sort of the communication belt across different countries so we can plan better in future. This is a European Commission project. So as such, you know, their ambition is to ensure everyone talks with the same tongue is the expression I can use here. Next slide. Okay. So the part of these, the second task is review practices across various countries. So we sort of sent a series of questionnaires. We had meetings with practitioners across Europe as such, and identified, you know, without being patronizing statement, you know, case examples of good practices for the application of whole life cost and risk-based tools. How do we develop the network and scheme level programs by application of whole life cost and risk-based tools? As I've said, how do we incorporate other sort of windows as such? And goes without saying, repeat, but what are the maintenance and operational sort of regimes in practice and in contractual terms as well? And, you know, bearing in mind, contracts as such for delivery of the services have a specific remit, but is that, you know, our remit, is that well engendered with the contracts as such? So we had very interesting responses, some formal and some very sort of open-ended sort of responses as such. So we put the data as a result of those questionnaires and looked at sort of the case examples against the 6 building blocks as such. And in understanding that without putting any specific links in terms of weakness across road authorities, the aim of the project is to have a more balanced view across the whole European network as such. So what we came out is sort of the next slide is sort of produce the red status, red, amber, green. The green being things are sufficiently satisfactory in terms of development of these 6 building blocks as such. The amber is where we need to do a bit more work, building more robust tools or systems as such, and red being work is required as such in developing sort of the basics of the building blocks as such. So, as you can see, we looked at it in the perspective of assets, individual assets, being structures, pavements, drainage, earthworks, the planning process for asset management. Those are the sort of things. So we got here areas where we believe, so if you look at whole life cost calculation, there's a general impression more work needs to be done, whether it be red or amber. So we need to build. And this approach, actually, we're talking about the discussion here is it the software we need, or is it the sort of the mindset we need as well? I think it's a bit of both. But we'll come to the actual Living Lab workshop where we talked about whole life cost as well. So Warren and Nang will a little bit more on that as such, as to where we are and what our stakeholders need as such. Okay, next slide. And the third and final task is to actually build on that, gather all the information and develop what we might call a good common framework. which works for all the practitioners. The message being, it's got to be simple, readily understood, and people can engage with it as such. So that work, is what we call, it culminates into a good practice guidance. And we are in the middle of preparing that final report as such, and it should be available for general public around, I know our remit is to develop and deliver by May, but in terms of open sort of accessibility, it will be there soon thereafter, subject to agreement with our client, the European Commission. The other two work packages, some of the elements as to what we're doing, you can see the broad statement, but I'd rather see you, those who are listening in, to see the whole sort of package once it's cleared through the European Commission processes as such. We can come back to it later on. Please do ask questions as such. The next slide. I have finished as far as I can say, but do hold your questions on your paper or wherever, and you can ask for further discussions. Thank you. Over to you, Nang.
Hi, thank you, Ramesh. So I will be going through actually what happened in the Living Labs. So going through the scope of the Living Labs and its focus on the M4 motorway. So the Living Labs was over the 8th and 9th of March 2018, and it was a lunch-to-lunch, let's say, workshop. So in general, what the Living Lab is really a concept that aims to provide the opportunity to embed and verify elements of this AM4INFRA project in real life scenarios. And really what we want to do is, what we've been doing all along is to really establish a wide network of regional-based Living Labs. And you've heard before with the Rome and Ireland Living Labs, where we set up really a dynamic process of continuous learning. So really, when we look at our Living Lab that we did in London, we are here to demonstrate, of course, the common framework, and this really focusing around lifecycle management and risk-based approaches. So applying the framework in the real scenarios, and those take into account the 6 building blocks, the elements, the themes that underlie these are collaboration, communications, and lesson learned, because we have an understanding that asset management cannot be done by one organization. There's actually those efforts. So the Living Lab in London, so this is a map of the southeast region of England, and you will see an orange box, and that is really the start of the location of the M4. So it starts or ends London, and it goes through Wales. So the M4 is approximately 304 kilometers in length, or 189 miles for the English. And it was built between the 1960s and 1970s. This is a strategically important route connecting Wales to the southwest of England and London. It includes connections to the M25, so which is the, let's say, London Ring Road, so to speak, Heathrow Airport, Reading, which is a key city for us, Swindon, Bristol, Cardiff, and Swansea. This road is quite particular, where it's owned both by the English and the Welsh road network. So this is what's this is a zoomed-in version of the M4 around the section of the M25. So what you see in yellow is future improvements are being done. So we're smart motorway being done on this section of the road, and this will mean widening, increasing the number of lanes that are on currently there. And it's just really to focus you on what is around the M4 in this particular area, the key cities, and also the smaller networks that are off the M4. On the right-hand side, you'll see in white junction 4B, which is the junction with the M25, and the picture just below this is actually showing an aerial view of what this junction looks like, just to give you an idea of what we're doing here. So this again is a summary of what I mentioned before, that the M4 is a heavy congestion road resulting in poor journey reliability. There's regular maintenance work planned along this route, and there's the construction of a smart motorway scheme. So we go on to now the outcomes of the Link Lab, how we did the Link Lab, what has happened. So initially what happened, we presented, as I did just now with you, the M4, the location, just to create an understanding in the room of what we are talking about. And then we asked various key stakeholders, well, asset owners along the M4 to describe to us what the approach to fallout cost is, or the approach to risk is, and how they manage the investments. So this, one of our stakeholders we had at the event was Transport for London. So here what we are seeing is their risk-based approach to and how they compare and prioritize their investments across the range of assets. So the key values or value criteria that they use are safety, functionality, environment, and financial. If you were to look at the graphics on your right-hand side, on the right side of the screen, the top one is looking at on the left, down the left, we're looking at the years. So the likelihood of a risk happening within this certain year. So 1 in 1 year, 1 in 2, up to 1 in 1 million. Then at the bottom of the graph, we have the consequences, so monetary values of what happens if this risk actually does take place. So if there's nothing to prevent this risk from happening. And then it's highlighted in different colors: green, yellow, amber, red, and black. Black being the highest, most significant, and green being the least significant, so to speak, in monetary terms. If we look at the graphic below, the second graphic, we have what is titled Asset Capital Program 2017-2018 Risk Distribution. So on the right-hand side of this graph, you see all the asset classifications that are here. And then there is these lines, the different color lines represent this monetary value that we saw at the top. And as you could see here, what they did here is proportion what the risk of not undertaking certain schemes would be. And this is classified from critical to low. So we just understand here in graphical terms, in both these graphics, what the risks are of not undertaking certain schemes with certain assets, and then we could actually put against this a monetary representation that gives us a better picture of what would happen if we don't undertake a scheme in a particular year. Then we move on to a different form. So here we're looking at the M25, which is a design, build, finance, operate public and private partnership project. And here we see what the influence of a different contract type does. So with a different contract terms, we have a different payment mechanism, we could help drive good approaches to asset management, investment, and whole life costs, as we're looking at a longer period and we're able to do more long-term asset management and maintenance works, renewals. And then how, also there's an understanding how contractual provisions are part of the collaborative contract between the government and the DBFO consultants, together with their suppliers. So really driving collaboration between the various stakeholders. So the two pictures on the right-hand side, you will see one highlighting the M25 and the different projects that are along there. And then at the bottom is the asset management strategy and how the M4 partnership works and how they develop the asset management. So looking at the analysis first, then planning, understanding, and that there is a circular approach that is done, and everything leads to the other, so everything is connected to one another. The next one that we had presenting is BIM and the asset management maturity. So this is looking at a maturity level in different aspects. So looking at maturity level through the eyes of BIM, so better information modeling, and not just 3D, but actually looking at the information for an organization. And here there were different studies done within the UK industry, and it was really assessing the level of maturity of organizations with BIM and asset management. And then these organizations were rated from a scale to 1 to 4. This really showed how different organizations are working and how they influence. There was a difference, for example, between organizations that are regulated and those that are non-regulated in terms of their behaviors and how they approach asset management in general. I'll pass you over to Warren that will take you through our second part of the workshop.
Thank you, Warren. So on the second day of the Living Lab, we carried out the teams of people into groups of about 6 or 8 people with representatives from different parts of the industries. We had representatives from the CEDA board, we had representatives from the various organisations involved with AM4INFRA. So we had a mix of perspectives, and each of the tables had a dialogue sheet which was printed on the tables, as you can see from the pictures there. And there were 10 questions. Now, questions were focused on trying to get people to think about things maybe in a different way to the traditional ways of viewing things. But the questions were set based with having a background of the 6 building blocks, but specifically looking at life cycle renewals and whole life costs and the risk-based approach. I'm just going to take you through the questions we posed, and the slides have got quite a lot of detail of specific comments that were made. I don't propose to go through all the individual comments, it's more there for a record. The first one was just a general question to get an idea of what people understood by asset management. So I think that there was a common theme that it is an evolving process, and that there was variation between the different countries. So it was very interesting through the exercise to get different people's perspective from their different level of progress in terms of asset management. The point was made that although technically we understand about asset management, the wider public and the wider society does not necessarily understand about managing risks. So that's something that we all need to take account of. And there was an interesting comment: too much talking and selling of products, not enough doing. Need better feedback from the construction stage. So if it linking into that whole point about we need to be making effective use of the information. The second question was, how would you prevent an operating company from performing transportation assets at their best from a whole life perspective? So this was trying to get people to think in a different way. So yeah, probably some very sort of understandable responses: a lack of scrutiny and follow-up, don't use effective tools or information, don't talk to each other. I think that was one of the points that was raised in the discussion, was that through the whole process of asset management, there are different organisations, there are different technical experts, and that lack of talking to each other can really cause problems. The other point, and I think it's, the UK is very, very good at developing processes and making complicated processes generally, but you know, there needs to be a sort of clear process and simple process wherever possible, and linking it into financial incentives so that people understand the significance of what they're doing and how it affects the asset. The third question was, gave the groups a bit of choice in terms of what they wanted to talk about. We had 16 words written around the edge of the dialogue sheet. Many, I've just included you here, but many of the groups wanted to focus on efficiency, sustainability, and a popular choice was the sensors, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. So those debates on those various words and the consequence were from like promoted some interesting discussion, particularly on the artificial intelligence and trying to think, where is the industry going? So the point was made, big data, social media can have a big impact and on processes, and predictions on processes are very important with regard to the network. The fourth question was looking at, a question was posed that periodic asset inspections are not a reliable way to monitor the deterioration of assets and take a risk-based approach. Is this true? So a bit of a question to provoke a response. There was a view that it was too subjective to allow a risk-based approach, and one of the things that Highways England has been doing is trying to develop a framework and methodology for structures assessments, so that inspectors are qualified and go through a qualification process. So there is an acknowledgement that we need to try and make this process as objective as possible. The point was made, any data is better than no data. But the other thing was that a lot of systems, particularly with the structures, are based on these periodic inspections. The fifth question was, how does technology currently support our whole life costing processes, and how might this develop? What are the dangers of too much reliance on technology? One of the groups was very clear, we need to keep it simple. A lot of the life cycle costs are, components. I think one of the things is that there's an industry, there's been quite a lot of work done and being done on deterioration models, but at the life cycle costing side of things, there needs to be a sort of clear focus on that. I think that the view on technology was that it is very useful and we need to be making the most of it, but it needs to be hand in hand with human interaction. And the point that if we rely too much on technology, it can reduce employees' skills and capabilities. And the point was made that in terms of defining whole life costs and actually putting numbers against whole life costs, there's a lot of interpretation in there in terms of renewal periods. And so as a process, it's quite difficult to get a consistent view on it. The fourth question was about the link between designers and construction, and therefore the impact on whole life costs. And the question was, designers never truly take account of the full impacts of operation and maintenance assets. Is this true? This was promoted some really interesting discussion, and there are some countries that actually their processes are very linked together in terms of the same groups of people are covering both types of activities, and so that was an acknowledgement that that was worked very successfully. In other, say, larger countries, I think there was a view that it is very fragmented, and yeah, in many cases the designers are sometimes don't even have very thorough construction experience, so let alone the operations and maintenance experience. So there is a danger of too much silo working, and we need to be doing more to ensure that the designers have the best information to be using to design components for schemes and parts of schemes, and to promote flexibility for the future and properly account of the operation and maintenance costs, the real costs. Okay. So the seventh question was, again, a challenging question. Current software providers provide cost-effective solutions for asset management systems. Is it true? This is one of the questions. Most people did agree with this statement. I think there was a general feeling that, particularly at the higher level, the systems didn't necessarily give the functionality that a lot of the stakeholders are wanting. And there was an issue, the amount of tailoring that's needed for these systems can be very expensive, and you do need that tailoring for particular, your given assets. The next question was more of a was looking at the constraints of what can prevent the best whole life cost solution. There was one of the groups confirmed there's 3 enemies of roads: water, trucks, and the Ministry of Finance. So there was quite a common view that actually finance does stop a proper whole life cost. So we need to be looking more at how we can work with that process. A lot of the project conditions culture rules in an organization. So people are very used to having a project with a defined start and end date and delivering that. But actually, asset management is about a whole life cycle of almost projects looking after the asset, which requires sometimes a different set of skills. One of the points was it may be difficult to influence as funding is from one pot, so you're competing against various other parts of organisations that are applying for money. Okay, so the last 4 questions. A risk-based approach to managing renewal of assets is dangerous. Discuss whether you think this is true. I think a lot of the discussion focused, but actually it's not really. There are other things that can have a lot more danger for asset management. But good technical data is a must to enable that risk. And what challenges are there to taking a risk-based approach in your organisation? The challenge of learning from each other and learning what the data tells you. But one of the comments made was that the living labs are a good approach because it focuses on a particular stretch of road and unites all the different stakeholders, and it should be a good learning experience. So overall, the summary, it was a great opportunity to discuss detailed topics and learn from each other. The exercise carried on for over an hour and a half, and everyone was very focused, and the discussions were really useful, and it helped build that understanding of the practical links between the 6. I think a general consensus that management level and strategic systems are important and have a strong influence on the asset management. It's not just the operational and technical levels that influence the success of asset management. So overall, the conclusions of the living lab in London, the phrase "a common language" came out a lot of the time, and I think it was very clear, despite all the different languages of the people in the room, it was very easy to have that dialogue on asset management because the themes and the aspects were consistent in terms of being able to understand and talk about it. Risk was identified as a common language. The TfL case study example was very interesting because they have brought their asset management across all their transport modes into one department now. So they've been going through an exercise to have a system to properly quantify and balance the needs of all the different types of the assets and the types of asset modes. And there was a general feeling that the way they'd approached it was a very good unifying way by using the risk management approach. And the third point was that collaboration between organisations and departments and within organisations is very important. So the AM4INFRA project and the Living Labs, it would be great if they can help demonstrate the benefits of collaboration, not just at a practical and a communication level, but also getting the contracts right. And I think the mood in the room at the end of the 2 days was very positive and enthusiastic, and I think everyone felt it was a very useful use of their time.
Okay, thank you, Warren. Much appreciated. So So as you can see, we've had a fairly in-depth sort of workshop regarding the London Living Lab. Lots of useful information that came out, and somewhere we'll be culminating and summarizing the outcomes and help us in setting the future direction, because the journey doesn't end here. Although for the purposes of presentation, Fabio is going to provide the conclusions here, summary and next step. So closing remarks as such. Come on to the discussion. As such, if you got, we'll keep this site open, but you know, let's come back to the question. But or rather than that, shall we take those questions now? So, do we have anyone on the chat? The actual forum's open for questions. Do we have questions? Do we have any questions?
Maybe I can propose one. I think we had some good examples now, and we did some good exercise in the Living Lab. But how do we find out some really common things? So can we find something which is which we say, okay, this is a product we all agree on, which can be not only good example, but also something that we say this is exactly what we should go on to do with.
So, what can we find? I think the whole ambition of this particular project is to develop sort of the common sort of frame. I just, whilst I'm trying to answer, just had a little nod. But yes, you know, I think we identified the core common 6 building blocks, and they stand, you know, as far as time and memory is concerned, they do exist. But the language in terms of how we adopt needs to be sort of addressed as such. I believe, and when I say I believe, we in sort of the project team believes there are threads here which can be adopted going forward as such. So part of this will be actually building on this. I should stress that the London Living Lab and the other living labs we've had in Netherlands and Italy, this is the first, these are the first stepping stones in terms of the theme and how we address, but the journey does not end here. We need to build on this and develop sort of our direction as to how this should be actually developed in a more standardized way. Well, by saying standardized way is developing common language. That's the emphasis. I'm not sure whether I've answered the question as such, but there's more work to be done as such.
Yeah, I think we agree on that. I think we have some really good examples, and it's really inspiring. And I think we also had a very inspiring discussion. But to really come to something where we say, okay, this is what we all agree on, and this is a common base. I think we need to make more steps in the future to reach that. Huh?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So this is Lang speaking here. And I think what we started here, we started a dialogue, which was the most important thing for the Living Lab. So with the London one, we started a dialogue with our partners, and it's us keeping up the momentum and continuing this dialogue to improve how we actually develop and apply asset management in the UK. So I think the Living Lab was a good opportunity to start talking and start seeing what the similarities are between ourselves and other organizations, and saying actually we're not very different. We have very similar things. And then now the next step will be actually to learn from them. So what they have already done that we potentially have not, and just work collaboratively, in collaboration to actually develop something that works for all of us and meet both our organizational goals, the customers, and the UK in general.
Yeah. So it's Ramesh, if I add on that, exactly what Nang has said, that this was the first stepping stone. And very much the actual workshop was big question, what can you take home from this? So we'd like to maintain the momentum, certainly in sort of London as such, as to having more better, agenda for the transport infrastructure we've just given you example of, and saying, can we develop this as a working model? What do we need to do, and how can we engage? How can we communicate? So in future, we must remember that the living laboratory as a concept is putting citizens at the heart of the overall decision and management of assets as such. We want, whether it be different, railroad or any form of transport, we need a seamless, the actual users of the network and the assets need seamless experience, which is in a more simple way enjoyable and actually meets their expectations. So if we demonstrate working with other bodies that there is a way forward, that's what we want. So we'd like to build on that, and certainly that's what is going to go forward to, our CEDA body as such in future.
Just to add, there's a good question from Geraldine, who's asked, was there any one or two conclusions that you would say influence the 6 building blocks? So I think one of the core things is that the whole life cost calculation, you need to get the inputs right into that process, so that there's a very strong link there between your deterministic and risk-based probabilistic tools and the quality of the data. So I think the links between those 3 items are very important, and obviously within the data that gives you the detailed knowledge of the assets. So I think that of all the 6 building blocks, I think the hardest is that whole life cost calculation part, potentially the deterministic and risk-based tools, but the whole life cost calculation requires assumptions on what's going to happen in the future. So that's where having the right processes, almost a standardized process, would help bring consistency to the asset management process.
Thank you, Warren. I also like to sort of put an emphasis. So far, we're talking about whole life cost and risk-based approach as such, but nothing works if there's no leadership in any organization. So we need very strong leadership. They buy the actual process and direction here, and it should be part of this sort of appropriate governance and processes. So we need this as business as usual culture in future. Leadership in engaging and buying those sort of blocks is very important from our point as such.
Okay, we have another question from Mark Tite. How do you plan on communicating further beyond the current group to help expand the asset management discussions?
Right. We can answer, but I think I would like to ask Fabio as such, because he's going to summarize as well. So do you want to say something, Fabio?
Yeah, sure. You mean now or at the end?
You can say now, because the question's been raised. How do you plan on communicating this further beyond the current group?
Well, thank you, Ramesh. First of all the information related to the webinar will be available, in the sense that it will be posted on the website, and everybody will be in condition to collect this information. And then we will have a couple of already established official steps. And the first one will be on the occasion of the TRA, Transport Research Arena, which will take place in a few weeks from now. That is on the 18th of April in Vienna, and a 3-hour slot has been established for AM4INFRA. On that occasion, we will be able both to explain the results and the approach of the project, and to get inputs and comments and possibly further elements of development for our project. And then we will deliver our by the end of August, and we are going to discuss the certain number.
Could we ask that everyone their line apart from Fabio, please?
Okay. Did everyone hear the response?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Are we not mute? Okay. So hope. Yeah. So I think I hope we can. Everyone's heard what Fabio said, but.
Can we mute people or not? Oh. Sometimes the person controlling it should be able to.
Okay, so are we still engaged with this? We're trying to sort out this problem online.
Now I think you can hear me, can't you?
Yes, a bit better.
It's still very quiet.
I just was going to conclude, and this is the stage of the process and the project in which we are going to collect contribution information and different positions from different stakeholders, and this is a part of the dissemination project. But we just started because the legacy of this project will go on also after the contractual and the contract itself, which will be at the end of August. Ramesh, it's to you now.
Okay. Do we have more questions? So
I think people are having problems hearing Fabio. I don't know whether is it possible for Fabio to speak louder?
Can you hear me? Well, I completed my intervention, so I hand over to the chairman.
Okay.
Shall I make a couple of comments from my understanding of the project? So I think in terms of communicating to the wider industry, the actual project deliverables will be published on the website when they're all finalised. I know from a UK perspective, we're going to be making some presentations of this work at a sort of national highways level. and potentially maybe through working through other similar organisations, we can help, highlight what's going on in the industry. I think the ideal is that these living labs receive some extra funding to really demonstrate and continue the good work that's been done. So I think that's an important aspect, but that will rely on the EU or the PC wanting to continue the work.
Right. So I think just to give you a balanced response to what Warren has said, and also answering one of the chat line questions, I think it's Geraldine who's asked, where do you take, what do you take from this living lab to help you move to the next step? I did answer earlier saying certainly in UK environment we'd like to continue, and I think Warren has just mentioned, but more importantly, perhaps we could expand as part of the trans-European sort of forum. So there are lots of open questions. As far as next step is concerned, the whole program, and hopefully Fabio's message was similar, whole program is to actually culminate and then sort of take it to the next step. And that is, this workshop we had was uniquely a joint workshop with the Conference of European Road Directors, the Executive Board, and we saw lots of positives coming out of that. So the next stage is to present the findings of the whole program, including the living labs, and seek further direction. I've sensed that the actual work in future will be actually more sponsored by CEDA, the Conference of European Road Directors, subject to details being discussed and agreed as such, and we plan to see them in June for getting that sort of firmly set. Of course, it goes without saying, the European Commission will be presenting the findings, and part of this finding and presentation, there is the TRA conference being held next month, and the European Commission will have their own stand as well. So we'd like to engage with them and find our feet with them on the basis the project is nearing its end, and see what they see as the future direction as part of the Horizon 2020. But with the emphasis, the CEDA is going to be our sort of, what do you call, the fundamental body which will drive the agenda as such. If and we're being fair, although I said cross-asset, cross-modes, we want to do that, but CEDA will take that sort of lead as the next step. I expect this group, of about 15 people delivering the 3 projects within the sort of the big project as such, to be part of that solution going forward as such. Hopefully that answers. I can't go into further detail because the actual outcome will be based on what CEDA sort of authorizes us to do. But there are lots and lots of useful lessons, and one of that is ironically all about the governance. So we need a bit of leadership from our sort of bodies, and that would be in particular CEDA in our case as such. Okay, hopefully we've answered that question, Geraldine. Okay. Fabio, there's chat line saying you're very weak. So do you want to shout when you do the closing remarks, please? I don't know, where we go from
Can you hear me?
Yeah, much better now. Much better. So anyway,
okay, fine.
Thank you. So do we have more questions?
There was a question from myself. I don't know if you can read it, or if otherwise I can read it myself.
So could you repeat that question, Fabio?
Yeah, the question is, the London Living Lab shows a very complex context with several key players and many goals that relate to the common interest and the stakeholders' positions. The question is, can those players agree on some decisions based on a common asset management approach? Is it a prerequisite, or we can imagine such a process also without a common AM/LCC basis already established? I hope it's clear enough.
Yes. So, trying to make summary of your question.
Okay.
A common.
Thank you.
Is there a common buy-in by these people who participated and stakeholders as such?
I know from an M25 project perspective, and the DBFO contractor found it very helpful to sort of discuss through some of these concepts, and because they've invested in asset management to improve the running of the contracts, so they've invested quite heavily, so they're very keen to learn. I think that the TfL case study had some interesting things that I think could be shared between all, and tried to maybe develop that further amongst all the individuals, because I know specifically the M25 project are looking at maybe trying to take on board that risk-based approach as a good mechanism to have a higher level understanding between all their different asset managers on the project and all their leaders for different types of assets. So I think that was a sort of clear positive sign that there is an attitude and an enthusiasm to collaborate together and, you know, start trying to take this forward. Unfortunately, we didn't have the individuals from Heathrow joining us on the day, but I know they're very keen to make sure that they, with the big infrastructure works that are planned, they're keen to make sure asset management is properly considered. So I'm sure they will be very keen to link into, you know, any higher level methodology that might be developed as part of the Living Lab.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's good. There are a number of options how we deliver the solution going forward, but what Warren has said is absolutely right. So just going back a little bit, part of this sort of presentation at the London workshop was Better Information Management, Project 13. So clarification, Project 13 is actually led by the Institute of Civil Engineers. So it's a professional body without any vested financial interest, if you really think about it. So when we talk about that, and what Warren has said is, obviously we need some, you know, body which can actually glue in all these different aspects and having that sort of independent sort of view. So, and please don't assume anything out of that, but is this something we can adopt working with the institutions, such as the Institution of Civil Engineers, or even the Institution of Asset Management as such? So there is better engagement and buy-in, because if we work independently, it may lose its momentum. So we want to maintain the momentum. Do we bring key sort of people who hold the glue together as such?
I think that's very interesting, because the Institute of Asset Management has a core theme on helping people understand the value of the infrastructure and the value of asset management. So if we're looking at a way to try and bring a more standardized process for decision making, I think looking at that future value is very important. And the point that was made at a conference with the IAM last year was that something like the sewer system in London, where at the time it was built in the Victorian times, it was, in some say, it was over-designed maybe, because if you were doing it today, you wouldn't have put in the same size system as was put in then. But what that resulted in was that actually the water authorities in London didn't need to dig up the streets of London for, you know, another 60 or 70 years. So there was a lot of value that decision made. So there's an interesting point there that maybe we could try and start considering. Are we properly capturing the value of decisions?
Yeah. After all, we're not managing roads absolutely. The roads have intertwined relationship with other assets. This is the irony. That's why we had this living laboratory, cross-asset, cross-model as such. So that's a good example in relation to the sewers that were built historically many years ago as such. Right. Here we've got Mark Type saying, I will try and link in with Institute of Asset Management. Do you know who to get in contact with as such? Warren, do you want
Yes, I can pass you on a contact, Mark. Yeah, the London contacts is the guy I know, so I can pass you his details.
They're the ones actually holding on to the ISO 55000 direction.
Or they certainly have a strong influence into it.
Okay. Right. Do we have any more questions? We have 10 minutes, but Fabio is almost ready to summarize in that case. So if there are no questions.
I think just, sorry, Ramesh, one more point, which thinking back to the Living Lab, there was one view that because all the various countries are going to be at different levels of sort of maturity and understanding, that this process we can't give an overall methodology, for a detailed methodology for asset management that will be applicable to everyone. But what we need to focus on is the sort of higher level decision making, so that we can set up something consistent that will be applicable for countries no matter what level at maturity they're at. Yeah. So that was one of the good points made.
Okay. Thank you. So are we ready to let Fabio have the platform to summarize and next steps? And really, before we said, but meanwhile, thank you for actually asking questions, and hopefully you got the responses. So Fabio, over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you all for attending the webinar, and especially the effort provided by Highways of England. And I think that each of us could experience the spirit of the today event that we shared in a few weeks ago. And the description of the Q&A session and the tree presentation was also very interesting in my view. I attended, but I had the impression that the spirit has been forwarded to all of us. Getting to the conclusion, first of all, a short summing up of the questions and the major issues that emerged. We talked about the leadership, which is necessary in order to help organization and stakeholders engage. We talked about the way we are going to, the project is going to use the results and to communicate. And then the question about the prerequisite of asset management background in order to get to a common understanding of infrastructures. And then the detailed methodology for asset management. And in order to put all those issues together, I would like to remind that this project can be read from 2 points of view. First of all, each organization or company or branch or of administration which deals with the building, operation and maintenance of networks is interested in such a project, because asset management and life cycle costs are now a key element for managing, but also for understanding and for relating to the clients and the stakeholders. So this is the first possible use of the project. But the second one is also interesting because the ambition is to give a tool to a superimposed, let us say, organization such as the government, a ministry, or an independent organization which has the goal of putting together the interests of different players. For instance, the Rome webinar has been carried out just based on this purpose, to put on the table 3-4 different operators of road network and try and help them to find a common goal, a common level of service, a common KPI. So the second possible use of the project is to use this common approach to make policy, that is to read the present needs in a different way. And I think that also the questions that we heard by the floor were very interesting from this point of view, because you can perceive both the single organization interest and approach in order to perform at the best with respect to obligements and level of service and stakeholders and so on, and the interest of let us say a common view about a corridor, about a region, about an area, about the infrastructure and mobility needs, which are commonly expressed by any community which is living anywhere in the world now. So I would like to conclude not only by thanking all participants, but also by stressing that it's an ongoing process, in the sense that we have been trying to collect methodologies and experiences and to put them at disposal of a wide community of practitioners and experts and scholars, and also officers of these administrations. But this is just the beginning, because we are going to pass through a wider process of dissemination of this information, and the legacy of the project in our ambition will be to leave an already established level of common understanding about the issues we discussed. I would like to thank you, and I hand over to Ramesh again.
Okay, thank you, Fabio. That's succinctly, summarized as such. Just as sort of a way of communication, you can see the slide there now in terms of the organizations that are involved in this particular project, the names of the project leaders and key people. I should open up and say that as well, and their sort of email addresses. So we've got that. I should sort of also emphasize that the London Living Lab was, and repeat, Living Lab was one of the 3 living labs we've had. So the one which Fabio talked about, Rome, the other one is Eindhoven. These have different perspective, but the whole thing is all addressing the sort of the fundamentals of the asset management for infrastructure and for infra project as such. You will see everything on the the website associated with the AM4INFRA eventually, certainly hopefully with the European Commission website as such. It is part of H2020 program, and if there are no more questions, I will say 30 seconds, and if there are, please ask now, otherwise I shall shut the actual presentation and end of discussions. Do we have any final sort of question? No? I can't see anything on chat line. So if that's everything, hopefully you have actually, there is one question. Could you speak up, please? Okay, So no more questions, and we will end the presentation. But before we end the presentations and close this webinar, I'd like to thank Mang, Warren, and Fabi for providing input to this webinar as such. So thank you everyone who joined as well. It's important we convey the message as such and enjoy the rest of the day as such. So thank you all. Cheers.
Thank you.
And goodbye. Cheers.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.